before the smoke curled above Birmingham's rooftops, before the factories roared awake. There was the quiet rhythm of boots on cobblestone. It is a sound that defines the city long before the sun manages to pierce the heavy, charcoal-coloured haze of the West Midlands. You are lying in the grey half-light of a room that smells of damp wool and cold soot, listening to that rhythmic click-clack of iron-shod heels against the pavement outside. It is the 1890s, and the world you inhabit is one of iron, steam, and a desperate, quiet pride. As you stir beneath the heavy, scratchy blankets, the air in the room is biting. It carries the metallic tang of the nearby foundries, a scent that never truly leaves your skin. This is Small Heath, a labyrinth of red brick and narrow arteries, where the houses lean into one another as if seeking warmth. You lie still for a moment, letting the muffled sounds of the waking world wash over you. There is no sudden alarm, only the gradual, grinding crescendo of the industrial beast finding its breath. You rise slowly, your feet meeting the cold floorboards. The wood is worn smooth by generations of families who have occupied these few square feet of space. In the kitchen downstairs, you hear the soft, rhythmic scrape of a kettle being moved across the range. The sounds are small, intimate, and familiar. As you descend the narrow stairs, the light changes from the bruised purple of the morning sky to the warm, flickering amber of a single oil lamp. Your mother is already there, seated by the small hearth. Even in the dimness, you can see the silver glint of her needle as it flashes in and out of a heavy piece of fabric. She is always sewing, whether it is mending the rough corduroy of your trousers or finishing a piece of piecework for the local tailors. Her hands are a blur of practiced, tired motion. She doesn't look up as you enter, but the slight softening of her shoulders tells you she knows you are there. There is a quiet dignity in her labor, a silent understanding that in this city, to stop moving is to be swallowed by the shadows. Your father sits across from her, his large, calloused hands wrapped around a mug of weak tea. He is a man carved from the very coal he moves at the factory. The black dust is etched into the deep lines of his face, and beneath his fingernails, a permanent map of his toil. He looks exhausted, a deep-seated weariness that goes beyond a lack of sleep. It is the exhaustion of a man who has spent 30 years feeding the fires that power the British Empire, receiving only a pittance and a cough in return. You see the way he looks at the fire not with anger, but with a hollow, reflective gaze. This is the reality of the working class, a cycle of labor that begins before the light and ends long after it has vanished. You step out onto the threshold of the front door, and the chill of the Birmingham morning hits you like a physical weight. The street is a narrow canyon of soot-stained brick. The houses are back-to-backs, cramped and sharing walls, where the private lives of hundreds are separated only by the thickness of a few bricks. The air is thick, a soup of coal smoke, horse manure, and the sulphurous belch of the chemical works. It settles in your throat, a taste you've known since birth. In the distance, the first factory whistles begin to wail. It is a mournful, haunting, sounder collective summons that pulls thousands of men and women from their beds and into the maw of the machines. You watch the bull ring of activity begin to swirl. Long-suffering horses, their breath blooming in white plumes, pull heavy carts laden with iron rods and coal sacks. The wheels of the wagons creak and groan, protesting the thick, viscous mud that carpets the streets, a mixture of earth and industrial waste that never truly dries to an outsider. This might look like chaos, but to you it is a symphony. You know the exact pitch of the steam hammers at the BSA factory. You know the specific rattle of the milkman's float. And within this landscape of struggle, a new culture has been simmering. You've heard the names whispered in the markets and on the street corners. The Peaky Blinders. They aren't the grand, cinematic villains of a penny dreadful. To you, they are simply the sloggers who grew up on these same muddy banks. They are the young men who decided that if the law wouldn't protect them and the factories would only break them, they would create their own order. They are a product of the penny hangings and the cramped courtier subculture of style and defiance. It isn't just about the violence, it's about the look. In a world of grey and brown, they wear the peaked caps, the silk scarves, and the bell-bottomed trousers as a uniform of rebellion. It is a way of saying, I am here, and I will not be invisible. You begin your walk through the neighborhood, your hands buried deep in your pockets. You pass the corner shops, where women in heavy shawls are already queuing for bread, their faces etched with the mental arithmetic of poverty. You pass the children, their faces smudged with dirt, playing with hoops in the gutter before they, too, are swept up by the school or the workshop. Everything feels heavy, the sky, the brick, the very history of the place. As the morning progresses, the light remains filtered and weak, never quite reaching the bottom of the narrowest alleys. You find yourself walking toward the heart of the district, where the pubs stand like fortresses on every corner. They are the cathedrals of the poor, the only places where a man can find a moment of warmth and a respite from the relentless noise of the looms and the lathes. You approach a small, nondescript pub known as the Marquise. The windows are thick with grime and condensation, glowing with a dull, inviting orange light. You push open the heavy oak door, and the world of the street falls away. Inside, the air is still and heavy with the smell of stale ale, sawdust, and tobacco. It is quiet here, a sanctuary for those who work the night shifts or those who have found a different way to survive. You take a seat in a shadowed booth in the corner, your eyes adjusting to the dim flicker of the oil lamps hanging from the blackened ceiling beams. The brass rails of the bar glint softly. Across the room, sitting alone at a small round table, is a man only a few years older than yourself. He doesn't look like a laborer. His jacket is well cut, though worn at the cuffs, and his waistcoat is fastened neatly. But it is his hat that draws your odger flat, tweed cap pulled low over his brow, casting his eyes into deep shadow. He isn't doing anything remarkable. He is simply sitting there, a half-finished pint in front of him, his fingers idly tracing the rim of the glass. There is an aura of stillness about him that is different from the exhaustion of your father. It is a calculated stillness. He isn't looking at you, yet you feel he is aware of every movement in the room. He represents the off-check boys, the ones who have stepped out of the factory line to walk the tightrope of the street gangs. He isn't a monster. He's a neighbor who chose a different path of survival. You watch the way the light catches the brass buttons on his vest. He is a Peaky Blinder, a silhouette of the new Birmingham, a man who knows that in these streets, your reputation is the only currency that doesn't devalue. You sit in the silence, the muffled thud of the distant factories providing a heartbeat to the room. You watch him, and he, in his own way, acknowledges the world around him without ever speaking a word. The shadows in the pub seem to stretch and yawn, wrapping around the both of you. It is a quiet moment of recognition of where you come from and what the city demands of you. The day is only beginning, and the weight of the iron is waiting. But for now, in the amber glow of the oil lamp, you simply breathe. You feel the pull of the streets, the unspoken codes of loyalty, and the looming shadow of the chimneys. This is your world. This is the beginning of your story in the smoke and the grit. And as the lamp flickers, threatening to die out, you realize that the quiet of the morning is over. The city is fully awake now, and the choices you make in these narrow streets will define the man you are to become. You watch the man in the peaked cap stand adjust his coat and vanish into the fog of the doorway, leaving you alone with your thoughts and the cold dregs of the morning. The orange glow of the oil lamp in the marquise flickers, a small rhythmic pulse of light that seems to beat in time with the distant, muffled thud of the steam hammers. You remain in your booth, the high wooden back shielding you from the draft of the door, and you watch the man in the peaked cap. He hasn't left yet. He has simply shifted, leaning back against the rough-hewn timber of the wall. There is a weight to the silence between you, but it isn't heavy with threat. It is the shared silence of the tired, the observant, and those who are beginning to see the world for what it truly is, a machine that demands everything and gives back only soot. The textures of the pub begin to press in on your senses, grounding you in this sanctuary of amber and shadow. You reach out and run your hand over the surface of the table. The wood is scarred with 1,000 stories nicks from pocket knives, rings from damp glass, the smooth depressions where elbows have rested for decades. It feels honest. Underneath your palms, you can feel the faint vibration of the city's industry, a low-frequency hum that travels through the very foundations of the earth. Across the room, the man gestures a small, sharp movement of his chin, inviting you to move closer. There is no bravado in the gesture, just a quiet acknowledgement of a fellow traveler in the grey. You stand, your boots clumping softly on the sawdust-covered floorboards. The sawdust is there to soak up the spilled ale and the mud tracked in from the canals, and it muffles your footsteps, making the walk to his table feel strangely dreamlike. As you sit, the smell of the place envelops you. It is a thick, comforting curtain of aromas. The sharp, fermented tang of dark ale, the sweet, earthy musk of twist tobacco being puffed in clay pipes, and the underlying scent of wet wool. Almost every man in the room is wearing a heavy overcoat or a fustian jacket, damp from the Birmingham drizzle, as the heat of the pub draws the moisture out of the fabric. A faint mist rises from the shoulders of the patrons, swirling in the lamplight like ghosts of the factories they just left. "You've a look of your father," the man says quietly. His voice is low, a gravelly baritone shaped by the smoke of the Midlands. He doesn't ask your name. Names are often less important than lineages in Small Heath. He reaches into a pocket and pulls out a small pouch of tobacco and a stack of thin papers. You watch his hands, they are steady, the skin toughened by labor, but the movements surprisingly delicate. He begins to roll a cigarette, and you find yourself mesmerized by the ritual. This is the first lesson of the brotherhood you are drifting toward, the importance of the small things. In a life where you own nothing, not the house you sleep in, not the air you breathe, not the machines you operate, the way you hold yourself, the way you prepare your tobacco, and the way you dress become your only true possessions. He wears a flat cap made of heavy, charcoal-colored wool. It isn't the floppy, shapeless thing a laborer wears to keep the dust out of his hair. This cap has been blocked and pressed. It sits low and defiant, the peak stiffened, creating a sharp line of shadow across his brow. It acts as a shudder, allowing him to observe the world without the world fully seeing him. It is more than head. It is a boundary. Soon, other young men begin to drift toward the table. They move with a specific grace, a slow, deliberate gait that suggests they are in no hurry to return to the beck and call of a foreman's whistle. They are the sloggers, the Peaky Blinders, but tonight they are simply a circle of brothers. One by one, they take their places, the wooden chairs creaking under their weight. You listen to the sound of their laughter. It isn't loud or boisterous. It is a low, rolling sound, like the tumbling of stones in a riverbed. They talk of the day's racing results, the quality of the coal arriving at the wharves, and the petty tyrannies of the local constabulary. There is a sense of belonging here that you have never felt in the sterile, echoing halls of the factory. Here, you are not a hand. You are a person. One of them, a lad with a sharp nose and eyes that seem to find the humor in everything, leans forward. He is wearing a silk scarf, a shock of deep crimson against his drab waistcoat. He notices you looking at it. He reaches up and adjusts the knot, his fingers lingering on the smooth fabric. "Silk," he whispers, a small smile playing on his lips. "From the markets in the south. Cost me a week's wages, but when I wear it, I don't feel the grit in my neck. I don't feel like I'm part of the brickwork." This is the heart of the identity you are adopting. In the harsh industrial landscape of the 1890s, style is the ultimate form of resistance. To wear a tailored jacket with narrow lapels, to polish your boots until the black leather reflects the flickering gaslight. To ensure your trousers are cut with a specific bell at the bottom, these are acts of defiance. They are a way of saying that you refuse to be ground down into the mud. You look down at your own clothes. Your boots are sturdy, but they are caked in the grey slush of the street. Your jacket is a hand-me-down, loose and functional. You realize that you want the armor. You want the sharp lines and the pressed wool. You want the world to look at you and see someone who has claimed his own dignity, even if he had to steal it from the margins of a hard life. The man in the peaked cap reaches into a leather satchel beside him and pulls out a cap. It is new, the wool thick and dark, the stitching precise. He slides it across the scarred wood of the table toward you. "Try it," he says. You pick it up. The weight of it surprises you. It feels substantial, a piece of craftsmanship in a world of mass-produced iron. You run your thumb over the peak. It is hard, reinforced with buckram, or perhaps something sturdier. You pull it onto your head, feeling the inner band grip your brow. You pull the peak down, and suddenly the room changes. The glare of the oil lamps is softened. The edges of your vision are framed by the dark wool. You feel a strange, grounding sense of security. You are no longer just a boy from the back-to-backs. You are a part of a collective. The conversation flows around you like a slow-moving river. They tell stories of loyalty of men who stood their ground when the police tried to clear the street corners, of families who were fed by the collections taken up in the pubs when a father was injured at the forge. You realize that the gang is actually a social safety net, a tribe formed in the absence of any other support. The loyalty is the glue. The style is the flag. You spend hours in that dim, warm circle. You learn the language of the streets, the subtle nods, the meaning of a hand placed on a certain lapel, the way to walk so your boots make a specific ringing sound on the stones. You are being woven into a tapestry of working-class survival. As the night deepens, the fire in the hearth sinks into a heap of glowing red embers. The air grows cooler as the landlord begins to extinguish the lamps one by one. The brotherhood begins to break up, the men standing and stretching, their shadows elongating and dancing against the walls. There is a round of quiet handshakes, firm, lingering grips that convey more than words ever could. You walk toward the door, the new cap still resting on your head. As you step out into the night, the transition is startling. The biting air of Birmingham returns, but it feels different now. You feel taller. You feel insulated. The street is bathed in the pale, sickly light of the gas lamps, their mantles hissing softly in the damp air. The mud on the ground has begun to stiffen as the temperature drops toward freezing. You stand on the corner, your hands deep in your pockets, feeling the rough texture of your coat and the smooth, stiff peak of your cap. In the distance, the relentless machinery of the city is finally winding down. The great steam whistles have long since blown their final notes for the shift. The constant, rhythmic pounding of the drop forges has slowed to a sporadic, lonely beat. You can hear the hiss of escaping steam from a distant valve, a sound like a giant drawing a long, tired breath. Silence begins to settle over Small Heath, but it is not a hollow silence. It is heavy and expectant. You look up at the sky, but there are no stars to be seen through the permanent canopy of smoke and cloud. Instead, there is only the orange reflection of the blast furnaces on the horizon, a reminder that the fire never truly goes out. You think about your mother, still sewing by the dying fire at home, and your father, sleeping the heavy, dreamless sleep of the broken. You think about the circle of men in the pub, their silk scarves and their polished boots. You realize that you are standing at a threshold. Behind you is the life of a drone, a life of quiet evaporation in the heat of the factory. Ahead of you is a path that is dangerous and uncertain, but it is a path where you are seen. The darkness of the alleyways seems to reach out, inviting you in. You touch the peak of your cap one more time, a gesture that is now becoming second nature. The cold doesn't bother you as much as it did this morning. You have found a way to carry your own warmth, your own sense of self, in a world designed to strip it away. You begin to walk home, your boots clicking rhythmically on the cobblestones. The sound is different, now sharper, more intentional. You are no longer just moving through the city. You are part of its pulse. The silence of the night is your witness. The threshold of your home is a boundary between two worlds, a thin sliver of wood that separates the newfound weight of your identity from the crushing reality of your survival. As you step inside, the latch clicks with a sound that seems amplified in the stillness of the night. The hearth is a mound of grey ash now, the warmth long since retreated to the upper corners of the room. You remove your new cap with a reverence usually reserved for prayer, feeling the ghost of its pressure still circling your brow. You place it carefully atop a wooden dresser, away from the reach of the damp, and climb the stairs to the room you share with the restless breathing of your kin. Sleep comes not as a luxury, but as a temporary truce with the world. But the truce is short-lived. The morning does not arrive with a sunrise. It arrives with the knocker-up, a shadow in the street wielding a long bamboo pole to tap against the upper windows. The rhythmic tap-tap is the first mechanical heartbeat of the day, a persistent reminder that the machines are hungry. You rise, your muscles stiff from the previous day's labor and the chill of the floorboards. The pride of the pub, the silk scarves, and the brotherhood feel like a fever dream in the biting reality of 4 a.m. You dress in your work clothes, the rough, oil-stained moleskin trousers and the heavy linen shirt that has seen so many washings it feels like fine grit against your skin. The transformation is sobering. You tuck your peaked cap into a hidden pocket of your heavy overcoat, a secret talisman against the monotony of the shift. You cannot wear it inside the factory gates. There, you must look like every other cog in the great imperial engine. The walk to the factory is a slow, communal migration. Thousands of boots strike the cobblestones in a hollow, metallic chorus. The air is a thick, wet wool blanket of sulfur and soot. As you approach the ironworks, the sky begins to glow with a sickly, bruised orange not from the sun, but from the eternal fires of the blast furnaces. The smell changes from the damp earth of the street to the searing, metallic temps of molten iron and the acidic bite of the pickling vats. You pass through the towering brick gates, and the world of the slogger vanishes, replaced by the world of the hand. The noise hits you first, a physical wall of sound that vibrates in your teeth. It is the roar of the bellows, the rhythmic thumphiss of the steam pistons, and the high-pitched scream of saws cutting through cold steel. Here, time is measured not by the sun, but by the relentless cycle of the machines. Your station is in the heart of the forge. The heat is a living thing, a predatory weight that presses against your chest and draws the moisture from your eyes. You spend the next 12 hours in a choreographed dance with fire and iron. You move heavy casting molds, your hands protected only by thick, scorched leather pads. The sweat runs down your back, carving pale rivers through the soot that coats your skin. There is no room for reflection here. If you lose focus for a second, the iron will claim a finger or a limb. You watch the older men like your father, whose movements are mechanical, their eyes glazed with a permanent, 1,000-yard stare. They have become extensions of the lathes they operate. You feel the fatigue beginning to seep into your marrow, a deep, aching tiredness that makes your bones feel like lead. The steam from the cooling vats rises in thick, white clouds, obscuring the faces of your co-workers, turning them into shifting specters in the industrial gloom. The oil is everywhere. It coats the floor, making every step a precarious slide. It hangs in the air as a fine mist that you breathe deep into your lungs. By midday, your throat is raw and your head throbs with the constant, concussive rhythm of the drop hammers. Clang, hiss, clang, hiss. It is the heartbeat of Birmingham, a relentless reminder that you are a small part of something vast, cold and indifferent to your existence. And yet, as you wipe the grime from your brow with a greasy rag, you feel the hard edge of the cap hidden in your coat. It is your anchor. It reminds you that when the whistle finally blows, you will shed this soot-stained skin. You will wash the oil from your hands with lye soap that burns, and you will emerge from these gates not as a nameless laborer, but as someone who commands the street. The evening whistle finally wails, a long, mournful sound that signals the end of the shift. You spill out of the gates with the others, a grey tide of humanity. The transition is slow. You walk toward the public baths, paying your copper for a bucket of hot water. You scrub the industrial waste from your pores, the water turning a murky, charcoal black. As the heat of the bath soothes your aching muscles, you feel your identity returning. You dress with deliberate care. The rough work shirt is replaced by a clean one, buttoned to the chin. You put on the waistcoat, feeling the familiar snugness of the wool. Finally, you reach for the peaked cap. You settle it onto your head, pulling the brim low. The transformation is complete. The fatigue is still there, deep in your joints, but it is masked by the sharp lines of your silhouette. Tonight, the gathering is at a different corner, a spot where the street lamps are spaced further apart, creating pockets of deep, velvety shadow. You walk toward the meeting point, your boots ringing out with a clarity they lacked in the morning. You aren't alone. From the side streets and the alleyways, other figures emerge. They are dressed like Uther, same caps, the same dark overcoats. the same measured stride that you reach the corner of Garrison Lane, where the brickwork is stained a deep, permanent red. A group of young men is already there, leaning against the damp walls. They are passing around a flask of gin, the sharp, medicinal scent cutting through the evening fog. Among them is the man from the pub, his presence a calm center to the group's low-energy hum. The atmosphere is one of quiet, watchful pride. This is the walkout. It is a display of territory and presence. You stand together, not saying much, but the collective weight of your presence is felt by every passerby. The women in shawls quicken their pace, and the older men look down at their boots, acknowledging the shift in power. You aren't looking for trouble, but you are looking for respect. The tension is subtle, like a wire drawn tight. Across the street, near the mouth of a narrow court, you see a rival group, the boys from the Cheapside district. They are dressed similarly, but their scarves are tied differently, a small but significant marker of their tribe. They watch you from the shadows, their pipes glowing like tiny, vengeful eyes. There is no shouting, no sudden rush of violence. Instead, there is a slow, atmospheric chess match. Your group moves a few yards down the pavement, claiming a bit more of the light. They respond by spreading out, occupying the mouth of the alley. It is a silent dialogue of boundaries. You feel a surge of adrenaline, a sharp spark that cuts through the fog of your factory-induced exhaustion. This is survival on a different level, not against the machine, but against the hierarchy of the city itself. You look at your companions. The brotherhood feels tangible in the cool air. You are bonded by the heat of the forge and the cold of the street. You know that if a hand were raised against you, 10 hands would rise in return. This loyalty is the only currency that matters in a world where you have no bank account. It is a dignity bought with presence and a well-pressed cap as the hour grows late. A thick, yellow-tinged fog begins to roll in from the canals. It is the London particular, but here in Birmingham it is even denser, heavy with the particulates of 100 chimneys. It wraps itself around the gas lamps, turning them into soft, glowing orbs that hover in the darkness. The world becomes small, intimate, and mysterious. The rival group fades back into the mist, their silhouettes dissolving into the brickwork. The immediate tension evaporates, leaving behind a sense of accomplishment. You have held your ground. You have existed in a way the factory never allowed. The group begins to disperse, melting back into the labyrinth of small heath. You walk alone for a while, the fog muffling the sound of your footsteps. The city feels different at night. The harsh edges of the poverty are softened by the gloom. The back-to-back houses look like ancient, sleeping giants, their windows dark and blind. You find yourself standing on a bridge over the canal. Below, the water is a black, oily ribbon, reflecting the dull orange glow of a distant furnace. The only sound is the soft drip-drip of moisture from the iron railings and the faint, rhythmic chugging of a canal boat somewhere in the distance. The factory machinery has finally faded into a low, ambient hum, a ghost of the day's industry. You lean against the cold stone of the bridge, the wool of your coat damp against your skin. You feel a profound sense of calm. The duality of your life, the grueling labor of the day and the sharp, defiant identity of the night feels balanced for the first time. You are a part of the iron, and you are a part of the shadow. You touch the peak of your cap, feeling the sturdy, reinforced edge. You are no longer just a boy from the slums. You are a Peaky Blinder, a guardian of these foggy streets, a silent witness to the turning of the century. The city belongs to the machines during the day, but at night, in the gaslight and the mist. It belongs to you. The night air is cold, but your lungs feel clear. You watch the soft glow of the gas lamps through the industrial haze, each one a small, flickering promise that you will return tomorrow, sharper and more resolute than before. The mist over the Ree Valley doesn't lift as the days press on. It merely changes consistency, shifting from a wet, heavy blanket to a fine, stinging drizzle that coats the world in a silver sheen. You are moving through the city now with a different weight in your step, a sense of belonging that is as heavy and certain as the iron molded in the factories. You have passed the invisible threshold. You are no longer just a boy watching from the periphery. You are a thread woven into the dark fabric of the small heath streets as you walk. You find yourself drawn to the canal paths, the hidden arteries of Birmingham that pulse with the lifeblood of the Industrial Revolution. The water in the cut is still and dark, the colour of bruised plums, reflecting the soot-stained arches of the railway viaducts that tower overhead. These are the places where the city's official heart stops beating and the unofficial one takes over. Beneath the massive, echoing spans of the brick arches, the world feels vast and ancient. The rumble of a passing train above is a muted, rhythmic thunder, shaking dust from the mortar and sending tiny ripples across the surface of the canal in these shadows. The police presence is a constant, flickering thought. You see them occasionally, the blues, walking in pairs, their tall helmets silhouetted against the street lamps at the ends of the alleys. They carry heavy wooden truncheons and a deep simmering suspicion of anyone with a sharp waistcoat and a low-slung cap. But here, in the labyrinth of the arches and the towpaths, the law feels like a distant, foreign concept. The relationship is not one of constant conflict, but of a quiet, strategic tension. You watch them from the darkness of a doorway, and they watch the street, both sides understanding the unspoken boundaries of the Birmingham night dot. Your reputation is a garment you are learning to wear. It is invisible, yet you feel it settling on your shoulders every time you turn a corner. It is in the way the local baker nods to you, not with the casual indifference he shows the labourers, but with a slight, lingering hesitation. It is in the way the street clears just a few seconds faster when you and your brothers approach. There is a newfound gravity to your existence. You are a blinder now, and that name carries a history of both protection and fear, but the emotional weight of this identity is most felt when you pass the older residents of your street. You see them sitting on their donkey-stone doorsteps, women whose hands are gnarled, like oak roots from years of scrubbing, and men whose lungs carry the permanent rattle of the mines. When you walk past, wearing your polished boots and your defiant cap, their eyes don't always hold admiration. Sometimes you see a flicker of sorrow in an old woman's gaze. She sees the fine silk scarf around your neck and remembers a son or a brother who once walked with that same pride, only to be swallowed by the harshness of a prison cell or a back alley scuffle. To them, you are a sign of the times a generation that has stopped asking for a fair share and started carving it out for themselves. There is a quiet, heavy distance between your sharp, tailored world and their world of weary resignation. You realize that your pride comes at a cost. It is a shield that also acts as a wall, separating you from the very community you seek to represent. You continue your walk, leaving the residential rows behind for the narrow alleyways that cut through the heart of the workshop district. These paths are barely wide enough for two men to pass, the brickwork slick with a mixture of rain and machine oil. The air here smells of scorched earth and old copper. You find yourself moving with a deliberate slowness, savouring the solitude. The sloggers are often seen in groups, but the true test of your belonging is how you carry yourself when you are alone. You pass a small, independent nail shop, the rhythmic tink-tinking of a lone worker still at his anvil echoing through the cracks in the shutters. It is a lonely, haunting sound. You think of your own father, likely still hunched over his tea at home, his spirit as worn as the elbows of his coat. You feel a sudden, sharp pang of reflection. You are seeking a different life, a life of style and brotherhood. But you are still walking the same soot-stained earth. The shadow of the factory follows you even here, its silhouette looming over the rooftops like a silent judge. The path leads you toward the railway embankment, where the massive steam engines rest in the yards, hissing like giant, slumbering beasts. The smell of hot grease and coal gas is overwhelming here, a sensory reminder of the power that drives the world you live in. You stand for a moment under a railway arch, the brickwork vibrating as a freight train pulls away, carrying the products of your sweat to the ports and the empires beyond. As the train passes, you see a figure waiting in the amber pool of a gas lamp further down the path. It is the man from the pub, the one who first handed you the cap. He is leaning against a soot-blackened pillar, his silhouette sharp and unmistakable. He doesn't move as you approach, but as you step into the light, he reaches out a hand and adjusts the lapel of your coat, smoothing the fabric with a gesture that is almost paternal. "You're learning the walk," he says quietly, his voice barely a whisper against the hiss of the steam engines. "The street knows you now, but remember, the street has a long memory. There is no ceremony, no oath taken in blood. There is only this quiet moment of recognition under the damp Victorian sky. You are no longer an apprentice. You are a peer." You feel a strange, hollow sensation in your chest, an uncertain turning point. You have achieved what you wanted. You have the clothes, the group, the reputation. You are fully accepted. But as the gas lamp flickers, threatened by a sudden gust of wind, you realize that this path has no end. It is a commitment to a life of shadows, a life where the warmth of the community is replaced by the fierce, cold loyalty of the gang. The night deepens, the fog rolling in thicker now, obscuring the railway tracks and the canal. The world is reduced to a few yards of wet pavement and the soft, pulsing glow of the lamps. You stand there with your brother, two shadows in a city of millions, watching the industrial haze swirl around you. The silence is absolute, save for the distant, mournful whistle of a locomotive heading north. It is a sound of departure, of things moving on, while you remain rooted in the grit of Small Heath. You are a Peaky Blinder, a part of the iron and the mist, fully integrated into a world that the daylight world chooses to ignore. The path ahead is shrouded in the same fog that blankets the city, but for the first time you are not afraid to walk into it. The dampness of the canal path lingers in the fibers of your coat long after you have left the water behind. As you move deeper into the heart of the district, the solitary silence of the railway arches gives way to the low, hummed vibration of the Saturday markets. This is the pulse of Small Heath Place, where the meagre wages of the factories are bartered, spent, and occasionally, with a quick flicker of hope, risked. You are walking through the bullring, where the air is a thick tapestry of scents, the sharp, vinegary temps of pickled whelks, the earthy smell of potatoes still crusted with highland soil, and the sweet, cloying aroma of roasting chestnuts from a vendor's brazier. You move through the crowd not as a part of it, but as a figure carved out from it. Your presence is a quiet disruption. People give way not with a sudden leap, but with a gradual subconscious parting, like water flowing around a stone. You are fully accepted into the brotherhood now, and you carry that knowledge in the set of your shoulders. You watch the street vendors, their voices gravelly from years of shouting into the soot. They sell everything from second-hand boots to penny dreadful novels, their eyes constantly scanning the horizon for the flicker of a policeman's cape. In this world, money doesn't move in the large, abstract sums of the banks. It circulates in small, fragile ways. It is a copper penny pressed into a palm for a loaf of bread. It is a silver shilling tucked into a boot for safekeeping. You see the fragility of it in the way a mother clutches her purse, her knuckles white, calculating the cost of coal against the cost of a winter coat. And it is here, in this thin margin between survival and ruin, that the culture of the bet takes root. You turn away from the main stalls, heading toward a nondescript doorway tucked between a draper's shop and a butcher. There is no sign, only the familiar, rhythmic sound of a man coughing inside and the low murmur of male voices. This is a backroom betting shop. As you enter, the transition from the bright, chaotic market to the dim, smoky interior is instantaneous. The air is stagnant, heavy with the scent of unwashed wool and the pungent, spicy aroma of cheap cigars. The walls are bare brick, save for a few hand-scrawled sheets of paper tacked to a wooden board. These are the runners, the lists of horses racing at Newmarket or Kempton Park. The betting culture here is not the flamboyant, high-stakes gambling of the aristocracy. It is a meditative, almost spiritual pursuit. You watch the men huddled over the slips of paper. They are labourers, carters, and foundrymen, their faces illuminated by the pale, flickering light of a single gas jet. They study the names of the horses as if searching for a prophecy, a way to transcend the grime of the everyday for just one afternoon. The man from the pub is here, leaning against the far wall, his cap pulled so low it seems to merge with the shadows. He nods to you, a gesture so slight it would be invisible to anyone else. You move to join him, feeling the sawdust crunch beneath your boots. He is holding a small lead pencil stub, marking a slip with a precision that borders on the artistic. The 521 at 3 o'clock, he says, his voice a low rasp. Like us, he isn't just talking about a horse. He is talking about a philosophy. In the 1890s, for a man in your position, a bet is more than a gamble. It is an act of agency. It is a tiny, rebellious assertion that your future is not entirely owned by the man who owns the factory. If the horse wins, you might buy a silk scarf or a better cut of meat for your mother, or simply the luxury of not having to worry for a week. If it loses, the loss is just another familiar weight to carry, no heavier than the soot on your jacket. You watch the bookie, a man with a face like crumpled parchment, as he takes the coins. The money moves quietly, a dull clink of copper, the occasional soft thud of a silver sixpence. It is a fragile economy, built on trust and the shared understanding that the law is something to be managed, not obeyed. This is part of your role now, the quiet oversight of these small, illegal rituals. You provide the shadow in which these men can dream. The morning turns to afternoon, and the light in the betting shop remains constant, a timeless amber gloom. Eventually, you step back out into the market. The energy has shifted. The stalls are beginning to pack away, and the knackers are moving through the gutters, looking for anything of value left behind in the mud. You feel a sense of quietude. The meditative pace of the betting room has stayed with you, a calm contrast to the frantic noise of the forge. You walk toward the outskirts of the market, where the working-class entertainment begins to stir. You pass a penny gaff, a makeshift theatre in a converted warehouse. Outside, a man in a tattered top hat beats a drum, promising the horrors of the black country or the redemption of a sinner for the price of a penny. The entertainment is raw, loud, and designed to drown out the memory of the steam hammer. You see young couples, their arms linked, heading toward the music halls where the songs are bawdy and the ale is cheap, but you find yourself pulling away from the noise. Your identity as a Peaky Blinder carries a certain solitude. You are part of the brotherhood, but that brotherhood exists on the edges of the crowd, observing but never fully merging. You walk toward the higher ground, toward the rows of red brick terraces that overlook the sprawling industrial basin. The sky has turned a deep, bruised purple, the color of an old inkwell. The wind picks up, carrying the scent of rain from across the black country. It is a clean smell, momentarily stripping away the sulfur and the grease. You stand on a street corner, your back against a cold iron lamppost, and watch the first drops begin to fall. The rain doesn't come in a torrent. It begins as a soft, rhythmic patter. You look up at the rooftops of Birmingham, thousands of slate and brick peaks stretching out into the grey horizon. As the rain intensifies, the red brick turns a dark, saturated crimson, and the soot-blackened chimneys begin to glisten. The sound is soothing, a million tiny strikes against the hard surfaces of the city. It is a meditative moment. You think about the money circulating in the betting shops, the horses running on green fields you have never seen, and the brothers who are, at this very moment, standing in similar doorways, watching the same rain. You feel a deep, grounding sense of place. This is your kingdom, not of gold or land, but of brick, smoke, and resilience. The rain washes the dust from your cap and the grit from the pavement. The gully holes begin to gurgle as the water carries the debris of the day down into the hidden sewers. The city feels as though it is being cleansed, if only for a night. You pull your collar up against the chill, feeling the warmth of your own breath. Against the silk of your scarf, you are no longer a boy wondering what it is like to be one of them. You are the shadow in the doorway. You are the glint of a polished boot in the rain. You are the quiet authority of the street. As the darkness fully descends, and the gas lamps reflect in the growing puddles like fallen stars, you begin the slow, rhythmic walk back to Small Heath. The rain continues to fall on the Birmingham brick, a steady, calm percussion that lulls the industrial beast to sleep. You move through the wet streets with a sense of peace, knowing that the morning will bring the heat of the forge, but the night will always belong to the men in the peaked caps. The rain on the slate rooftops has transitioned from a rhythmic patter to a persistent, ghostly drizzle, a fine mist that clings to the window pane of your small upstairs bedroom. You are sitting on the edge of your narrow cot, the straw mattress rustling softly beneath your weight. The house is silent, save for the settling of the floorboards and the distant, muffled cough of a neighbor 3 doors down. This is the hour of the hollows, the deep well of the night where the pride of the street corners and the sharp lines of your tailored jacket cannot reach. Here, in the dim, amber flicker of a single tallow candle, the armor of the Peaky Blinder begins to feel heavy, not with the weight of wool, but with the weight of what remains unsaid. You reach out and touch the candle, your fingers lingering near the flame. The wax pools like honey, a slow, viscous movement that mirrors the pace of your thoughts. For months, you have moved through Small Heath as a shadow among shadows, finding strength in the brotherhood and identity in the peaked cap. But tonight, The silence of the home is more piercing than the roar of the factory. You can hear your mother's breath from the next rumour, shallow, weary sound. It is a sound you have known all your life, yet lately it carries a new frequency. It is the sound of a woman who is no longer just tired from the sewing. She is tired from the watching. Earlier that evening, as you had walked through the kitchen to head out to the marquees, your mother hadn't looked up from her stitching. She hadn't scolded you for the lateness or the company you kept. She had simply paused, her needle suspended in the air for a fraction of a second, her eyes fixed on the polished sheen of your boots. In that silence, 1,000 words had passed between you. She saw the change in your gait, the way you no longer slumped with the exhaustion of the forge, but carried yourself with a calculated, quiet alertness. She saw the silk scarf, a splash of colour that looked like a wound against the drabness of the kitchen, and in her stillness you felt a surge of quiet guilt or cold. Sharp realization that your ascent into the ranks of the sloggers was, to her, a slow descent into a world she had spent her life trying to shield you from. You look at your hands in the candlelight. They are cleaner now than they were a year ago. The lye soap has scrubbed away the deepest layers of industrial grease. But as you turn your palms over, you wonder if you have simply traded one kind of stain for another. To the men at the corner, you are a brother, a protector, a man of style. But to the woman who birthed you, you are becoming a stranger who speaks in the language of shadows and unspoken threats. You think of the way she handles your overcoat when she hangs it up with a ginger, hesitant touch, as if the fabric itself might tell her things she isn't ready to know. The guilt is not a sudden, sharp pain. It is a slow erosion. It is the weight of knowing that the money you tucked under the clock on the mantel, extra shillings that bought the better tea and the coal that doesn't smoke wasn't earned under the watchful eye of a foreman. It was earned in the quiet spaces of the betting shops and the guarded conversations of the towpaths. Your mother knows. She hasn't asked, and she hasn't refused it, and that shared silence is the heaviest burden of all. It is a pact of survival signed in the dark, a compromise that eats away at the simple. Honest pride your father tried to instill in you. You shift on the bed, and your gaze wanders to the corner of the room where your younger brother, barely 10 years old, sleeps in a tangle of thin blankets. He is the one who keeps you awake tonight. You have caught him watching you lately. He doesn't look at you with the worry your mother does. He looks at you with a wide-eyed, hungry adoration. You've seen him when he thinks you aren't looking, trying on your cap, pulling the peak low over his eyes, just as you do, mimicking the slow, deliberate way you lean against a doorframe. It frightens you. You want to tell him that the silk scarf is a collar, not a crown. You want to explain that the respect of the street is a hollow thing if it means you can never truly walk in the light. But how do you tell a boy who has grown up in the soot, watching his father wither away in a foundry, that he shouldn't want the only thing in Birmingham that looks like power? The cycle is beginning again, and you are the one spinning the wheel. You feel a profound, lonely responsibility. You are the hero of his world, yet you are leading him toward a life where his only friends will be the fog and the brotherhood of the desperate. The candle flickers, the wick drowning in its own melted heart. The shadows on the walls stretch and dance, turning the familiar corners of your room into something unrecognizable. You think of the railway arches, the canal paths, and the walkout. You think of the man in the pub who first saw the potential in you. He had promised you identity, and he had delivered. You are a Peaky Blinder. You are seen. You are respected. But here, in the small hours, you realize that identity is a costume you can never fully take off. It has seeped into your skin, altering the way you love your family and the way you view the very streets that raised you. You lean back against the cold brick of the wall, closing your eyes. The introspection is a heavy tide, pulling you out into the deep water of your own conscience. You wonder if there was ever another way. Could you have been like your father, a man of iron and silence, content to let the world grind him down until there was nothing left but dust? Or was this path inevitable, a biological response to the cruelty of the Victorian machine? You are a creature of the 1890s, a byproduct of coal smoke and class, forged in a city that values the product more than the producer. The guilt and the pride exist in a delicate, agonizing balance. You love the brotherhood. You love the feeling of the heavy wool against your back and the knowledge that you are part of a tribe that will never let you fall. But you also love the quiet, domestic peace of this house, a peace that your presence is slowly, subtly disrupting. You are a wolf in the fold, even if you are the one bringing the meat. Hours pass in this silent, internal vigil. The candle finally sputters and dies, leaving you in a darkness so thick it feels like velvet. You stay there, sitting upright, listening to the house breathe. You think of the horses in the betting shops, the women in the markets, the police in their tall helmets. All of them are part of the clockwork, and you are the gear that has started to turn against the grain. The air in the room begins to change. The absolute blackness of the night starts to fray at the edges, turning into a bruised, leaden grey. The transition is subtle, a gradual lifting of the veil. You can see the silhouette of the wash basin, the curve of the chair, and the glint of the brass buttons on your waistcoat hanging over the bedpost. The world is waking up, whether you are ready for it or not. In the distance, the first signs of the day begin to emerge. It isn't the birds. There are few birds in small heath that sing for the dawn. It is the sound of the world's machinery resetting itself. You hear a door slam down the street, the heavy iron latch ringing out. You hear the first horse-drawn cart, the iron-rimmed wheels grinding against the damp cobblestones with a sound like teeth on bone. The city is reclaiming its territory. You stand up, your limbs stiff and cold. You walk to the window and press your forehead against the glass. The street below is a canyon of grey, the fog still clinging to the doorsteps like a tired dog. You can see the shapes of men emerging from their houses, their heads bowed, their lunches wrapped in newspaper tucked under their arms. They are the hands, the army of the industry, beginning their daily march to the altars of steam and fire. And then it comes, the sound that defines the boundaries of your life, from the direction of the BSA factory, and then echoed by the foundries of Digbeth and the chemical works of Saltley. The morning whistles begin to wail. It is a long, rising, mournful shriek that pierces the morning mist. It is the call to order. It is the command of the master. To your father, it is a summons to labor. To your mother, it is a signal that another day of survival has begun. To you, sitting in the grey light with your heart full of a quiet, heavy guilt and a sharp, defiant pride, it is a reminder of the duality of your existence. The whistle marks the end of your night of reflection. The time for inner thoughts is over. You reach for your cap, the wool cool and familiar in your hands. You pull it on, feeling the peak settle low over your brow, shielding your tired eyes from the growing light. You turn away from the sleeping form of your brother and the silent worry of your mother's room. You descend the stairs, your boots making no sound on the worn wood, as you prepare to step out into the smoke once more. The morning whistle has long since ceased its wailing, its echo swallowed by a silence that feels heavier, more absolute than any you have known before. It is midwinter in the West Midlands, and Birmingham has been seized by a cold so profound it seems to have frozen time itself. As you step out from the shelter of your doorway, the air doesn't just bite, it invades. It is a dry, scouring chill that crystallizes the moisture in your breath before it even leaves your lips. You pull your overcoat tight, the heavy wool stiffened by the frost, and feel the way the cold dictates the very rhythm of the city. This is the season of coal frost. The soot and ash that usually swirl in the wind have settled into the rime on the cobblestones, turning the ground into a treacherous, sparkling black crust. Every surface is coated in a thin layer of dark ice. The houses of Small Heath, usually so vibrant with the sounds of shouting children and the clatter of life, have drawn inward. Doors are bolted tight against the draught, and the only signs of life are the thin, vertical plumes of white smoke rising from the chimneys, disappearing into a sky the color of a tarnished silver spoon. You begin your walk toward the canal, your boots crunching with a sharp, brittle sound against the frozen earth. In this weather, movement is not a choice. It is a necessity for survival. To stand still is to let the damp chill seep into your marrow, a slow, creeping numbness that turns fingers into wood and thoughts into slush. You see the horses of the dray carts, their flanks covered in thick burlap blankets, their breath blooming in massive, rhythmic clouds. The men leading them move with a stiff-legged gait, their heads bowed against the wind, their faces wrapped in rough wool scarves, until only their red-rimmed eyes are visible. The fog has returned, but it is different from the yellow London particular of autumn. This is a white, frozen mist-of-breath fog that clings to the iron railings and the brick walls, turning the neighborhood into a labyrinth of indistinct shapes. As you reach the edges of the canal, the world feels as though it has been drained of color. The water, usually a churning ribbon of industrial activity, has grown sluggish and dark. Along the banks, the edges have begun to freeze, forming jagged, translucent shelves of ice that trap the discarded coal dust and oil of the factories. The canal boats are moored in long, silent rows, their colorful paintwork muted by a layer of hoarfrost. The cold shapes your mood, paring away the unnecessary. There is no room for bravado or loud talk when the air itself is an enemy. You find yourself retreating into a quiet, meditative state, your mind focusing on the simple mechanics of heat and shelter. You think of the forge you left behind, the searing orange heat of the furnace that you once cursed. Now, the memory of that warmth feels like a lost paradise. You understand why the pubs are so crowded in the winter. They are the only places where the communal heat of human bodies can hold the winter at bay. You approach the railway arches, seeking the relative shelter of the massive brick spans. There, in the deep shadow, where the frost hasn't yet reached the center of the path, you see them. A group of your brothers, 4 or 5 men, their peaked caps pulled low, their hands buried deep in their pockets. There is no greeting, no boisterous call, only a subtle shift in the circle to include you. This is the quiet solidarity of the winter. In the summer, loyalty is expressed through the walkout and the display of style. In the winter, it is expressed through presence. You stand together in the lee of the wind, the collective warmth of your group creating a small, invisible sanctuary against the Birmingham freeze. You observe the way they moved, slight, rhythmic shifting of weight from one foot to the other to keep the blood flowing. One of the men, A tall lad with a scar that runs like a pale thread from his temple to his jaw reaches into his coat and pulls out a small metal flask. He unscrews the cap with stiff fingers and takes a long, slow draw. The scent of cheap, biting gin wafts through the frozen air, a sharp, medicinal smell that seems to cut through the fog. He passes it to you. The metal is painfully cold against your skin, but as the liquid hits your throat, it is a streak of liquid fire. It doesn't truly warm you, but it provides a momentary illusion of heat. A sharp jolt that reminds you that you are still alive, still defiant. The ice is thick on the Digbeth branch, the man says, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. The barges aren't moving. The cold won't reach the upper yards by morning. It is a simple observation, but it carries the weight of their world. The freezing of the canal is a disruption of the order, a reminder that even the great industrial machine can be humbled by the seasons. You listen to the sounds of the frozen city, the distant metallic clink of a hammer on iron, the muffled rumble of a train crossing the viaduct, the occasional sharp crack of the ice shifting on the canal. These sounds are clearer in the cold, traveling further through the thin, crisp air in this stillness. The loyalty you feel for these men is not about the gang's reputation or the money in the betting shops. It is about the shared endurance of the climate. You are the sons of the Midlands, forged in the same damp heat and the same biting cold. There is a deep, unspoken comfort in their presence. You don't need to speak of the hunger at home, or the way the damp is rotting the floorboards in the back-to-backs, or the fear of the winter fever. They know they are living the same frozen reality. You look at the man next to you. His jacket is thin, far too thin for a day like this, yet he stands with a rigid, stubborn pride. His cap is perfectly positioned, the peak a sharp, defiant line against the grey mist. It is a form of resistance. To maintain your appearance, to keep your boots polished and your scarf tied just so, even when the world is trying to freeze the life out of you, is an act of will. It is a way of saying that the winter can take your warmth, but it cannot take your dignity. The group stays together for a long time, watching the fog swirl under the arches. You feel the slow, rhythmic pulse of the city's winter heart. This is what it was really like, not the constant clash of steel, but these long, silent vigils against the elements. You are a part of a tribe that understands the value of silence and the necessity of the shadow. The cold doesn't divide you. It binds you closer, forcing you to rely on the proximity of your fellow men for the simplest of comforts. As the afternoon light begins to fail, turning the white fog into a deep, bruised charcoal, the wind dies down. The air becomes unnervingly still. The biting edge of the breeze is replaced by a heavy, expectant pressure. You look up at the underside of the railway arch, where the soot-stained bricks are glistening with moisture. The world seems to hold its breath. Then you see it. A single, white flake drifts down through the opening of the arch, spiraling slowly through the gloom. It lands on the dark wool of your sleeve, a perfect, intricate star of ice that vanishes in a heartbeat, leaving only a tiny, dark dot of dampness. Then comes another and another. The snow has begun. It isn't a storm, but a soft, hesitant, falling a silent blanket descending upon the iron and the brick. It falls on the frozen edges of the canal, on the peaked caps of the men standing beside you, and on the black, frosted cobblestones of the path. The white flakes are a stark contrast to the permanent soot of the district, a brief, fragile beauty that covers the grime of the industrial world. The men in the circle begin to move, adjusting their collars, preparing to head back to the warmth of the pubs or the flickering hearths of their homes. There is no haste, only a gradual, coordinated dispersal. You watch them melt back into the fog, their silhouettes becoming ghost-like as the snow thickens. You stay for a moment longer, standing alone under the great brick arch. The snow is falling more steadily now, a quiet, relentless descent that muffles the remaining sounds of the city. The clank of the distant factories is softened. The grinding of the train wheels becomes a low hum, and the world feels as though it is being tucked away under a layer of velvet. You reach out and catch a handful of the flakes, feeling the fleeting, icy touch against your palm. The cold is still there, deep and unforgiving. But the falling snow brings a sense of peace, a temporary truce in the long, hard winter of the 1890s. You pull your cap down a fraction further, shielding your eyes from the white drift, and step out from the shelter of the arch. Your boots make no sound now as they meet the softening ground. The black ice is being covered by a layer of white, and the world is becoming a study in monochrome. You walk back toward the heart of Small Heath, a lone figure in the gathering dark, feeling the weight of the season and the strength of the brotherhood in every step. The iron-rimmed wheels of the world have turned many times since you first felt the stiff weight of a wool cap upon your brow. Time in Birmingham does not move like a river. It moves like the heavy, rhythmic stroke of a piston grinding, relentless, and leaving a trail of soot in its wake. It is now the late 1890s, the very twilight of the Victorian era, and as you stand on the familiar corner of Garrison Lane, you feel the subtle shift in the air. The city you once knew as a labyrinth of brick and bone is transforming into something sleeker, colder, and infinitely more complex. The thaw of that great winter has long since passed, but the dampness seems to have settled deeper into your joints. You are no longer the wide-eyed boy who watched the oil lamps flicker in the Marquis with a mixture of fear and longing. Your face has been etched by the years. The fine lines around your eyes are a map of 1,000 watchful nights, and your hands, though cleaner than your father's ever were, carry the faint permanent scars of a life lived in the shadows. You have become a fixture of the district, a man of standing, but with that standing has come a quiet, reflective exhaustion. You look out over the skyline of Small Heath, and the changes are evident in the very breath of the city. The old, small foundries where men once laboured with hand tools and sweat are being swallowed by massive, sprawling industrial complexes. The sky is no longer just grey. It is a bruised tapestry of orange and charcoal, dominated by the hulks of new gasworks and the towering chimneys of the BSA. The smells have changed, too. The familiar scent of horse manure and coal smoke is now laced with the sharp chemical temps of new dyes and the electric ozone smell of the early power stations. The world is accelerating, and as you watch the first primitive motor cars rattle tentatively over the cobblestones, you realize that the era of the horse and the shadow is beginning to fray at the edges. The brotherhood, too, has evolved. The sloggers of your youth, the boys who fought for a street corner with nothing, but their fists and their pride have given way to something more organized, more calculated. The gangs are larger now, their reaches extending beyond the narrow courts and into the very heart of the city's commerce. There is more money moving through the bedding shops, but it lacks the fragile, desperate intimacy it once had. New names are being whispered in the dark, names of younger men who didn't grow up with the same codes of loyalty you hold dear. They are sharper, perhaps, but they are also more brittle. You see them in the distance, their caps pulled low, their silk scarves a bit too bright, and you feel a strange, paternal ache. You see your own youth mirrored in them. but it is a reflection seen through cracked glass. You begin a slow, meditative walk through the neighborhood, tracing the paths you have walked 10,000 times. You pass the back-to-back houses where the laundry still hangs like white flags of surrender between the chimneys. Your mother's house is still there, but the window where she used to sit and sew is dark now. She has passed into the quiet earth, leaving behind only the silver needle you keep tucked into the lining of your waistcoat. Your father, too, is gone, his lungs finally succumbing to the iron dust he breathed for 40 years. You are the last of that specific lineage of toil, a bridge between the old world of manual labor and the new world of the street. The canal path is quiet today. The ice of years past is gone, replaced by a dull, stagnant shimmer. You walk under the railway arches, the brickwork now black with the accumulated soot of a century. The rumble of the trains overhead feels heavier, more frequent the pulse of an empire that is beginning to realize its own mortality. You stop for a moment and lean against the cool stone, closing your eyes. In the darkness of your mind, you can still hear the rhythmic click-clack of boots on cobblestone from that very first morning. You can still smell the wet wool and the weak tea. It is a haunting, beautiful memory, a ghost that walks beside you in the twilight. You find yourself drifting toward the marquee, the pub where it all began. The exterior has been repainted a deep, somber green, but the windows are still thick with the same grime and condensation. You push open the heavy oak door, and the familiar chime of the bell feels like a greeting from an old friend. Inside, the world has remained remarkably still. The air is still thick with the scent of stale ale, sawdust, and tobacco. A preserved pocket of the 1890s that the changing century hasn't managed to touch. The landlord, a man whose hair has turned the color of ash since you first saw him, nods to you with a quiet, respectful familiarity. He doesn't need to ask your order. He pours a pint of dark, heavy ale and sets it on the bar with a muffled thud. You take the glass and move to the corner booth, the same booth where you once sat and watched the man in the peaked cap. You sit in the shadows, the high wooden back of the seat shielding you from the world outside. The oil lamps are still there, their amber light flickering in the draught, casting long, dancing shadows across the scarred wood of the table. You run your hand over the surface, feeling the nicks and the rings of 1,000 glasses. It is a tactile history of your life. You realize that you have become the man you once observed. You are the figure of stillness, the man whose presence commands the room without a single word being spoken. Across the room, near the hearth where the coal fire is glowing a deep, contemplative red, sits a young man. He is barely 20, his jacket a little too large for his frame, his boots still showing the dust of the factory. He is holding a half-finished pint, his eyes fixed on you with a mixture of curiosity and reverence. You see the way he looks at your cap, the way his fingers idly trace the rim of his glass. He is at the threshold. He is standing exactly where you stood all those years ago, peering into the fog, wondering if there is a life beyond the machine. You don't gesture for him to come over. Instead, you simply raise your glass in a small, almost imperceptible toast. It is an acknowledgement of the cycle. The city will change, the industries will shift, and the names of the gangs will fade into history. But the spirit of the street, the need for belonging, the search for dignity in a world of soot will remain. You feel a profound sense of peace. The violence, the fear, and the guilt have all been distilled into this single, quiet moment of reflection. The silence in the pub is deep and velvety. You watch the smoke from your pipe curl toward the blackened ceiling beams, joining the ghosts of a million other conversations. You think of the brotherhood, of the men you stood with under the railway arches in the freezing snow, and the women who waited on the doorsteps with their hearts full of worry. They are all part of you, etched into your soul like the dust in a miner's lungs. The night deepens outside. The gas lamps in the street will be hissing now, their light struggling against the encroaching fog. But here, in the amber glow of the Marquis, time has ceased to matter. You are a Peaky Blinder, a relic of a fading era, a king of a small, smoke-stained kingdom. You lean back, savouring the cool bitterness of the ale and the warmth of the fire. The transition from youth to memory is almost complete. As you sit there, lost in the soft, rhythmic hum of the pub, a distant sound begins to pierce the stillness. It is faint at first, a low, mournful vibration that travels through the brickwork and the floorboards. It is the factory whistle at dawn. The sound is the same as it has always been along. Rising shriek that signals the end of the night and the beginning of the toil. But for the first time in your life, the sound doesn't fill you with dread or the need to move. You stay in your booth, the peaked cap casting a protective shadow over your eyes. The world outside will wake up. The men will march to the forges. The new century will arrive with its engines and its wars. But for this final, lingering moment, you are exactly where you were always meant to be. The whistle fades into the grey morning air, leaving behind a silence that is final and calm. You take one last sip of your ale, adjust your cap with a slow, practiced hand, and prepare to step out into the light of a world that is no longer entirely yours, but one you helped to forge. The final echoes of the morning whistle have long since been buried by the relentless march of the new century. Yet they linger in the quiet spaces of your mind like the persistent ringing of a struck anvil. You are standing by the window of a small room in a house that feels much too quiet. Outside, the world of 1901 is beginning to stir, but it is a world that feels increasingly unfamiliar. Queen Victoria is gone, and with her, the era that birthed you, fed you, and broke you seems to be receding into the thick, industrial fog. You are a man of middle years now, and as you look at your reflection in the darkened glass, you see not just a face, but a chronicle of consequences. The pride you once carried like a polished blade, the sharp, defiant vanity of the peaked cap and the silk scarf has softened into something more complex, something heavy and contemplative. You reach out to the small table beside you and pick up your cap. The wool is thin now, worn smooth at the edges by 1,000 unconscious adjustments. It no longer feels like armor. It feels like a ledger. Every stitch in the lining seems to hold a memory, and every memory carries the weight of a choice. You sit down slowly, the joints of your knees creaking in a way that reminds you of the old factory floor. This is the hour of regret, a soft, persistent shadow that doesn't scream but whispers in the silence. You think of the family you tried to protect with the spoils of the street. You think of your mother's hands, which never truly stopped shaking, even when the coal bin was full and the table was laid with meat. You realize now, with the clarity that only time can provide, that you didn't just bring money into that house. You brought a cold, atmospheric tension. You brought the smell of the alleyway and the unspoken fear of the midnight knock. The emotional cost of your identity was paid by those who loved you. In installments of sleepless nights and bated breath, the regret is a quiet companion. It sits with you in the dim light of the single candle, reflecting on the siblings who watched you. Your younger brother, the one who once looked at your cap as if it were a crown, is a man now. He followed the path you trod, But the world he inherited is harsher, more mechanical, and stripped of the romanticism you once used to justify the life. You see him sometimes on the street, and there is a hardness in his eyes that you put there, a cynical edge that comes from learning too early that the law is an obstacle and loyalty is a survival tactic. You wonder, in the stillness of the room, if you could have been a different kind of example. But in the 1890s, in the heart of Small Heath, what other options were truly laid before a boy of the back-to-back? And yet, alongside the regret, there is the pride, a stubborn, unyielding ember that refuses to go out. It is the pride of a man who refused to be a nameless cog. You remember the brotherhood, those quiet vigils under the railway arches when the snow was falling. You remember the way the group moved together, a single organism of shared experience and mutual protection. There was a profound, almost spiritual beauty in that solidarity. In a world that wanted to grind you into soot, you found a way to be seen. You found a way to say, I am here, and I have brothers who will bleed for me. That memory doesn't feel like a crime. It feels like a triumph of the human spirit over the industrial machine. You stand up and begin to dress, a ritual that has become slower over the years. You don't rush the buttons of the waistcoat. You don't snap the cap onto your head. Everything is done with a meditative, lingering touch. You are preparing to walk through the city one last time tonight, not as a king of the corner, but as a ghost of the era that is passing. As you step out into the Birmingham night, the air is cold, but it lacks the biting, aggressive chill of your youth. It is a damp, heavy cold that smells of iron and old rain. You walk toward the center of the district, and the changes in the landscape press in on you. The old penny hangings are being cleared away for newer, more uniform tenements. The gas lamps are being replaced in some areas by the stark, buzzing hum of electric lighter white, artificial glare that leaves no room for the shadows where the blinders once thrived. The city is becoming more transparent, more regulated, more clinical. You pass the mouth of an alley where you once stood your ground against the boys from Cheapside. The brickwork is still there, but it is covered in posters for new cinema theatres and motorcar exhibitions. The world is looking forward toward a future of speed and steel, while you are tethered to the slow, rhythmic pulse of the past. You feel a strange sense of displacement, as if you are a character in a story that has already reached its final page, yet you are still walking through the setting. The consequences of the life are visible in the faces of the men you pass. You see an old comrade sitting on a bench near the canal, his back hunched, his eyes unfocused. He was one of the sharpest, a man who could command a room with a look. Now he is just another casualty of the long, slow war of the streets, his mind worn down by the gin and the constant low-level vibration of a life lived on the edge. You don't stop to talk. There is a mutual understanding in your silence. You are both survivors of a wreck that is still slowly sinking. You find yourself walking along the canal path, the water black and lightless beneath the frozen edges. You think of the money that circulated in the betting shops, the silver and copper that felt like power. It seemed so small now. The true currency of your life wasn't the coins. It was the moments of quiet connection. It was the way a brother would place a hand on your shoulder in the pub without saying a word. It was the way you looked out for the widows in your court, ensuring their fires stayed lit through the winter. These were the things that gave the gang its soul, the things the history books will never record. The emotional weight of your journey feels like a physical presence in your chest. You have lived through the peak of the Victorian industrial nightmare, and you have come out the other side with your dignity intact, but your heart scarred. You realize that the Peaky Blinder wasn't just a gang member. He was a symptom of a society that gave its workers everything they needed to build an empire, but nothing they needed to feel like men. The cap, the scarf, the boots, they were the tools of a self-made humanity. You reach the high ground near St. Andrews, looking back over the sprawling basin of the city. The furnaces are still glowing on the horizon, a permanent, orange heartbeat that will likely continue long after you are gone. The sounds of the night are different now. The rhythmic clanging of the old forges is being joined by the high-pitched whine of electric motors and the distant staccato chugging of internal combustion. The Victorian era is closing its eyes, and you are one of its final witnesses. You feel a sudden, overwhelming sense of gratitude. Despite the guilt, despite the worry you caused your mother, despite the hardness you instilled in your brother, you lived. You truly lived. You didn't just exist in the shadow of the factory. You became the shadow itself. You found beauty in the soot and brotherhood in the grime. The wind picks up, carrying a fine, misty rain that blurs the lines of the city. You adjust your cap one last time, pulling it low against the damp. You aren't looking for a pub tonight. You aren't looking for a brother. You are simply walking. You move through the narrow streets of Small Heath, your boots clicking softly on the wet cobblestones. The sound is slower now, more reflective. You pass the dark windows of the houses, the sleeping families, the quiet workshops. You are alone, but you don't feel lonely. You are accompanied by the memories of 1,000 nights just like this, by the ghosts of the men who stood beside you, and by the weight of the city that made you who you are. The fog begins to rise from the canal, thick and white, swallowing the bases of the lampposts and the corners of the buildings. You walk into it, your silhouette growing faint and ethereal. You are a part of Birmingham's history now, a fragment of the 1890s drifting into the 20th century. You continue your walk into the deep, velvet dark, the rhythmic sound of your footsteps fading into the distance. The city of iron and steam remains, a silent monument to the labor and the defiance of your generation. And as the last of the gas lamps flickers in the mist, you vanish into the night. A Peaky Blinder at the end of his era, walking toward the quiet, unknown horizon of the future. The world has grown quieter now. Or perhaps it is only that you have learned to listen to the silence that exists beneath the city's roar. You are sitting on a wooden bench in a small patch of green that didn't exist when you were a boy. The century has turned its page, and the year is 1910. The Victorian era, with its rigid iron heart and its soot-stained lungs, has become a memory, a story told in the flickering shadows of the past. You are an older man now, your overcoat draped over your knees, your hands resting on the silver head of a walking stick. The skin on your knuckles is thin like parchment, but the grip is still steady, a remnant of the strength you forged in the heat of the BSA and the chill of the garrison lanes. As you sit here, you find yourself looking back on your youth, not with the sharp ache of longing, but with a soft, diffused reflection. It feels as though you are looking through a sheet of distorted glass, watching a young man move through the fog of the 1890s. You see him clearly, the way he adjusted his peaked cap with a touch of arrogance, the way he polished his boots until they shone like beetle wings, the way he felt the weight of a silk scarf against his throat like it was a badge of office. That young man seems like a distant relative now, a ghost who inhabited a Birmingham that is slowly, inevitably dissolving. The city is changing its skin. You look toward the horizon, where the great chimneys still stand, but the smoke seems thinner now, less suffocating. The air is still heavy with the scent of industry, but it is no longer the thick, sulphurous soup of your childhood. New brick is and cleaner, straighter, replacing the crumbling battery backs and the cramped courts of Small Heath. The penny hangings are disappearing, and with them the specific, desperate intimacy of the slums. The world is becoming more orderly, more regulated. You see the motor buses rattling through the streets, their engines coughing a different kind of smoke, and you hear the high-pitched ring of the electric trams. The horse, the faithful, steaming companion of your youth, is being pushed to the margins of the road. You close your eyes, letting the sounds of the modern city fade into the background. In the theatre of your mind, the years begin to compress. You think of the brotherhood, the sloggers, and the blinders who were your world. They are mostly gone now, scattered to the winds or settled into the quiet resignation of old age. Some fell in the small, forgotten skirmishes of the streets. Others were taken by the fever or the relentless wear of the machines. But in your memory, they are forever young, forever sharp, standing in the amber glow of the marquees, with their caps pulled low and their eyes full of a fierce, quiet pride. You don't feel a need to judge those years. There is no moral lecture to be given to the ghosts of your past. You simply acknowledge the truth of it. You did what was necessary to survive a world that saw you as nothing more than fuel for its fires. The gang, the style, the loyalty, they were your way of carving a name into the iron. You weren't a villain, and you weren't a hero. You were a man of Birmingham, a product of the steam and the brick. There is a deep, resonant peace in that realization. You have lived through the peak of the industrial storm, and you have reached the quiet evening of your life with your dignity still intact. The sun begins to set, casting long golden-red shadows across the park. The light is soft, lacking the harsh glare of the midday sun or the sickly orange glow of the blast furnaces. It is a gentle, Victorian light, a final nod from the era that made you. You feel a sense of profound stillness. The regrets that once kept you awake in the candlelight of Part 6 have lost their edges. They have become part of the landscape, like the weathered stones of the canal bridges. You have seen the consequences, you have felt the emotional weight, and now you are simply a witness to the passage of time. You stand up slowly, your movements deliberate and careful. You settle your cap on your head. It is a different cap now, more sensible, less defiant. But you still pull the peak down with that same instinctive motion. You begin the walk back toward your home, moving through the streets of a Birmingham that is both familiar and strange. As you turn onto a quiet, residential street where the old cobblestones have not yet been paved over with smooth bitumen, you stop. The evening is still. The modern noises of the city, the distant hum of electricity, and the rattle of the motor cars seem to fall away. In the gathering dusk, you hear it click-clack, click-dash-clack. It is the sound of your own boots on the cobblestone. It is the same sound that opened the story of your life. The rhythmic, metallic strike of iron-shod heels against the hard, frozen earth. In this moment, the years vanish. You are once again the boy rising in the grey half-light of the 1890s. You are the young man walking toward the factory gates. You are the slogger standing guard under the railway arches. The sound is a bridge across time, a constant heartbeat that has accompanied you through the heat of the forge and the cold of the canal. You walk slowly, savouring the rhythm, click-clack, click-clack. It is a comforting sound, a reminder of the thousands of miles you have travelled within these few square miles of red brick. Each step is a word in the long, immersive narrative of your existence. You pass a gas lamp that is just being lit by a lamplighter with a long pole, the flame blooming like a yellow flower in the gloom. The light reflects on the wet stones, and for a heartbeat, you see the reflection of a much younger man walking beside you, his silk scarf fluttering in the wind. You reach the door of your house. It is a modest place, clean and quiet. You pause on the threshold, looking back one last time at the city. The industrial haze is settling for the night, and the first stars are beginning to pierce the thinning smoke. Birmingham is resting. The great machine is slowing its pulse, preparing for the dreams of a new century. You step inside and close the door, the latch clicking with a final, peaceful certainty. You remove your cap and hang it on the peg. You move to your chair by the hearth, where a small coal fire is glowing with a steady orange warmth. There is no need for oil lamps or candlelight tonight. The fire provides all the light you require. You sit in the silence, listening to the soft, rhythmic ticking of the clock on the mantel. It is the only sound now. The factory whistles are silent. The shouting of the markets is a memory. The tension of the street corners has evaporated. You feel the weight of your history settling into you, a comfortable, heavy blanket that prepares you for sleep. You think of the young men who are out there now, in the new Birmingham, finding their own ways to belong, their own ways to dress, their own ways to survive. You wish them well, but you do not envy them. Your story is written in the soot and the iron of the 1890s, and it is a story that is finally, beautifully, at rest. The room is warm, and the shadows on the wall are soft and slow. You lean your head back, closing your eyes. The image of the canal at night, with the snow falling lightly on the brick rooftops, drifts into your mind. You feel the cool, misty air of the Midlands on your face, and the sound of the boots on the cobblestones fades into a gentle, distant echo. The Victorian night has finally come to an end, and as the embers in the hearth turn to grey ash, you drift into a deep, reflective sleep, a Peaky Blinder whose work is done, whose pride is satisfied, and whose soul is at peace with the city that made him.